Okay, I am very sorry I didn't get all the March 10 years later videos out in March. This past month has been very busy for me. A lot of stuff has gone on and I just didn't get around to doing them. It's a good thing April and May are going to be much quieter for this series because it gives me time to do these videos. I'm going to film the last two March videos back to back, and I might try to get done all of the April and May albums as fast as I can, depending on how busy I get. So with that said, welcome back to 10 years later, the series where I talk about albums from the 2010s that were either impactful to me, impactful to music in general, very popular, or just worth revisiting 10 years later for good or bad reasons. And as you can tell from the title, the album that we'll be talking about today is the 2011 Britney Spears record, Femme Fatale. Britney Spears, the princess of pop, you know her name. She was far and away one of the most iconic pop artists of the 2000s, and she has maintained a high level of popularity even heading into several new decades. While a lot of the media tends to get caught up in her personal life and loves to play that part of her up, it's worth remembering that Britney was a consistent hitmaker with iconic songs like Baby One More Time, You Drive Me Crazy, Oops I Did It Again, Toxic, Womanizer, Circus, and 3, among several others. I want to note that even if it wasn't her biggest hit, If You Seek Amy is one of the funniest titles I've heard in a pop song, possibly ever. This was her 7th studio album, and I was initially surprised to hear this, but it's considered her biggest in terms of singles. Beyond being her latest #1 album on the Billboard 200, the record featured 3 top 10 singles on the Billboard Hot 100 in Till the World Ends, I Wanna Go, and the #1 single, Hold It Against Me. Now, while I wasn't the biggest fan of Britney Spears growing up, I think she deserves a ton of credit. For starters, being able to have the comeback she had despite the media slinging her name through the mud and centering a lot of controversy around her is honestly pretty fantastic. I think in that regard, she's proven to be quite an inspiration. And beyond that inspiration, I have to give her credit for putting out some of the biggest, most enduring singles of the late 1990s and the entirety of the 2000s. Whether you like her music or not, Britney was putting out hit after hit after hit for well over a decade, and she endured superstar status for longer than most other artists. That brought me to this record, as I was curious to see if it still sounded good today. It's 16 tracks in 58 minutes, which is on the beefy end for a pop record, and it can feel like it sometimes. Even so, I will say it is an enjoyable album that I had fun with, even though I did have a few issues with it. In a way, this album feels like a tale of two halves. Much of the first half is pretty average to forgettable with only a few rare highs. The iconic single Till the World Ends kicks off the album, and of course it's an electro-pop anthem. This was 2011, it shouldn't be a surprise to know that this was what pop music sounded like at the time. Simple beat, heavy synths, and some filtered mixing on the vocals. It's a track that's perfectly emblematic of the pop landscape of the time, all the way down to the iconic post-chorus. But it's still quite a banger, and it's one that, for as simple as it is easy to have some fun with. It turns out Hold It Against Me was a bigger single, given that it hit #1, and it's another dance pop song that at the beginning almost sounded like a continuation of Till the World Ends. I know it came out before that track, but with the way they're sequenced on the album, this sounds like it finishes the thought of the last track. It's another nice sounding dance song with that throbbing feel that I could perfectly envision playing in a club with a bunch of strobe lights. Only thing is that I don't think it hooks quite as well for me, and while it has some cool sonic variation, it's just not one of the most memorable or sticky songs on the album. I Wanna Go is another top 10 single that I completely forgot about until re-listening to it for this video. I remember being okay with this track the few times I heard it years ago. It plays into a lot of the same dance pop vibes of the other big singles, but the chorus and charisma of Britney's vocals are too enjoyable for me to ignore. I know some people were a bit annoyed by the auto-tune filters on her voice, but I think they actually work well for the song and give it another fun layer. Inside Out is a mix of electro-pop and some R&B vibes, and while I like the glitzy, plucky feel of the instrumental and some of the callbacks to Britney's other songs, I'm honestly not as interested in the song's chorus. Again, it doesn't hook me in as much as I hoped it would, and it holds the song back just a little bit. Same goes for the track Seal It With a Kiss. This is a bit of a jump into dubstep that doesn't seem to do much that really stands out in a positive or negative way. It's a fine track, but it unfortunately just doesn't really do anything for me. How I Roll is a bubblegum pop song that honestly I found a bit more annoying than fun. There's not a whole lot to the production, and Britney sings with an in and out breathing effect and distorters that just don't add anything to the song. Maybe there'll be some fun factor for Britney fans, but for me, I'm just not quite as into a song like this. Drop Dead Beautiful is another pretty simple song that sticks into the familiar sounds of the electropop vibes of yesteryear. Unfortunately, this is another track that sadly just kind of blends in with a lot of the others on the record, and some of the filters on Britney's voice don't make her vocals too flattering. Sabi's short appearance also amounts to almost nothing outside of that goofy lyric where she says someone's steaming like a pot full of vegetables. Big Fat Bass is perhaps the lowest depth this album sinks to. While I see the song's intention in mixing its its electropop elements into something trance-like, this song is stunningly repetitive, and Britney's vocals are unfortunately lathered in filters that just don't sound flattering to her at all. will.i.am also has a very arbitrary appearance that does nothing more than contribute to the repetitiveness of the song. After that though, the album greatly improves. Trouble for me is a track I definitely have a lot of fun with. Sure, the instrumental isn't anything too wild or different than much of the rest of the record, but I think Britney manages to elevate it with her very charismatic vocals. There are definitely some weird filters on them, but they work well in giving the song a bit of a sexy vibe. Trip to Your Heart has this weird, almost nostalgic vibe to it. It's bright and sunny, the type of track that honestly brings me back to times when life was simpler and things were happier. There's something unexplainable about it that makes it nice. It doesn't exactly sound different than much of what's on the album, but there's just a very sweet, lovely vibe to it that makes it pretty hypnotic. Gasoline is a bit slower than some of the other tracks here, with a sexy vibe that almost sounds like it's lined with a few small guitars. Britney once again elevates this sound with energetic vocals up against some of the more robotic sounds on the production. Criminal closes the standard edition of the album, and it's wildly different than much of what the rest of the record has. Where much of this thing is centered around dance pop and electropop, this feels more like a straight pop song that's not far off from being considered folk, lined with a very sticky flute melody as well. It blends together nicely, and Britney's vocals are more raw than a lot of the other tracks here. It's a strong cut that ends the record nicely. But we're not done here, because we have 4 bonus tracks, which mostly help lift the album a bit. Up and Down goes right back into the electropop sound of the rest of the album, though it does have some very catchy elements to it. It plays into a lot of the vibes of similar songs with its heavy instrumentals, but Britney makes it work thanks to the catchiness of her several hooks. I thought some of them were going to get annoying, but fortunately they don't overstay their welcome. Selfish also sticks into the electronic vibes, though I don't think it hits the same as some of the other tracks here. Once again, Britney sounds charismatic and it makes the song a bit more interesting, but I don't think it really has much of a strong hook. He About to Lose Me though takes on a much lighter feel that again moves away from some of the electronic vibes of the other tracks for something that feels closer to a piece of soft rock. It's a song with some very heartbreaking lyrics, but it still carries a sweet vibe that's nice and head noddy. It's a pretty emotional turn, and while I wasn't initially big on the chorus, it did grow on me and I quite like the song. And Don't Keep Me Waiting ends the record off with a surprising new wave track that Britney made alongside none other than Travis Barker. It's a very different flavor and I do like the effort, though I think it could have been improved a little bit. While the production takes some fascinating and enjoyable twists and turns, I wish the chorus was a little more interesting. Even so, I like what the track was going for, and I think it's a fun enough finisher even if it's not one of my favorites on the album. Overall, as I've said before, Britney Spears' Femme Fatale is an enjoyable record, but it's definitely a tale of two halves. The first part of the record is definitely inconsistent, with a few enjoyable tracks mixed with the album's biggest duds. Counting the bonus tracks into the length though, the second half picks things up a lot, and I feel like there are a few more interesting sonic directions on the back half. As it is, this is a well-made album that fortunately manages to elevate itself above feeling like an early 2010s relic. Many of the sounds are obviously ingrained in that early 2010s style of electropop, and some of them can start to blend together a bit at points, but when revisiting a lot of songs and albums in this style, I've found that what tends to make or break them is the star performing over top of them. And in this case, Britney remains a dynamic performer with enough charisma to elevate a lot of these songs. Sure, the album could have been cut down by at least a few tracks, and some of the collaborations don't go over all too well, but as it is, it's a nice album with enough high points to satisfy beyond Britney's typical fan base. Back in 2011, I'm not sure I would have been crazy about this album given my lack of interest in Britney Spears and the fact that I was kind of getting tired of this electro-pop, dance-pop sound at the time. Listening to it now, I do think it's an enjoyable if somewhat inconsistent album. If I had to put it on my scale, it would probably get a good rating. A lot of that was lifted by the second half, but regardless, it is a solid listen that feels like more than a relic of its time. But that's just my opinion on this album. What did you guys think about it? Did you listen to it back in 2011? Do you still listen to it now? Did you love it back then? Hate it back then? Do you still love it now? Do you still hate it now? Are you just completely indifferent towards it? Whatever your thoughts and experiences are, leave them down in the comments below. Let's keep this civil and have some fun as we like to do. If you guys want to hit like and subscribe, thank you. If not, it's no big deal. I totally understand. And if you guys want to support my passion for content creation by subscribing to my OnlyFans, where I create exclusive music review and poetry content for $4.99 a month, the link to that is in the description. Again, it's no big deal if you can't or don't want to. I totally get it, and I appreciate anyone who's able to. And as soon as this video goes off, I'm going to be filming my next 10 Years Later video, which is going to be on Wiz Khalifa's Rolling Papers. That would have been my last March 10 Years Later video, but now of course I'm doing them in April, so sorry about that. But I'll try to get that up as soon as I can, so stay tuned for that. But until next time, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.